Da Vinci is one of a long line of artists who have told us, beginning with the ancient Egyptians and running through the early Christians and Tibetans, that art is a medium, it's a conduit.
The things that tell us a lot of things about Leonardo da Vinci is not what it is inside, but what it is missing.
In 2007, The Last Supper was photographed at 16 billion pixels of resolution, and the data sat in an archive for almost 2 decades. Nobody had built a tool that could actually read what was inside the file. Then somebody finally trained a neural network on Leonardo's mirror writing, fed it the scan, and the system started flagging patterns in the wall behind Jesus that no human eye had ever detected. The discovery that nobody was ready for the story. Going viral right now sounds almost impossible to believe. Word began spreading across the internet in late 2025 about a research team that fed hyperspectral scans of the Last Supper into a neural network trained on Leonardo's mirror writing. The claim is that the system pulled coherent phrases out of the wall behind Jesus, words placed in a spiral pattern following the golden ratio, lines that read like a quiet declaration of war on religious authority. Reports describe sentences like "faith without reason is the sleep of truth, and those who wake shall see what was forbidden." The scaffolding underneath the viral claim is completely real. Leonardo really did fill thousands of pages with backwards handwriting that scholars are still decoding. The Last Supper really does have hidden layers that have been surfacing for decades. AI really is being used right now to pull lost paintings out from under famous masterpieces. And one Italian musician really did discover something buried inside the Last Supper in 2007 that the world barely paid attention to. The truth turns out to be stranger than the fiction, and by the time we reach the end, you will understand why Leonardo may have actually been writing to a future audience after all. The man who did not trust the world with his thoughts. Leonardo da Vinci left behind something close to 7,000 pages of personal notebooks, and almost every single one of them was written backwards. Actual mirror script that you can only read by holding a reflective surface up to the page. Walter Isaacson, who wrote the definitive biography in 2017, called these notebooks the greatest record of curiosity ever created. Carlo Pedretti, who spent his entire academic life decoding them at UCLA before passing in 2018, called the Codex Atlanticus the most important of all Leonardo's manuscripts. That single codex alone contains 1,119 leaves bound across 12 volumes, and it covers everything from flight machines to musical instruments to the design of an entire imaginary city. Scholars have argued for centuries about why Leonardo wrote this way. The dominant explanation today is practical. He was left-handed, and pulling a quill from right to left across the page kept his hand from smudging the wet iron gall ink. When he wrote letters meant for other people to read, he switched to ordinary script. So the simplest answer is that he was just being efficient. But that answer alone does not fully explain everything that we see in those notebooks. There is a separate theory that has refused to die for 500 years, and it has serious historical weight behind it. Leonardo lived in an era where independent thinking that questioned Scripture could literally kill you. In April of 1476, when Leonardo was only 23 years old, an anonymous denunciation was dropped into one of Florence's morality boxes, accusing him of sodomy with a young goldsmith. The case was eventually dismissed because the accuser refused to sign their name, but Leonardo spent time in prison waiting for the verdict. Florence's Office of the Knight had already convicted nearly 17,000 men on similar charges by the end of the century. He learned at 23 what happened to people whose private lives became public knowledge. He spent the rest of his life making sure that did not happen again. That early scare gave Leonardo a permanent reason to keep his thoughts behind a wall of his own making. And not long after, the world around him would make that decision look prophetic. The painting that was engineered to hide things. When Leonardo started work on the Last Supper in the year 1495, he was on commission from Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, for the wall of a Dominican refectory inside Santa Maria delle Grazie. He had 3 years to deliver the most ambitious mural of the Renaissance, and the very first decision he made about it baffled everyone around him. Standard practice for wall paintings at the time was buon fresco. You apply pigment directly into wet plaster while the surface is still damp, and the paint chemically bonds into the wall as it dries. Done correctly, a buon fresco can last for centuries. Leonardo refused to work that way. He hated the speed it demanded, hated the way it forced simplification of detail. So he invented his own method. He coated the dry wall with a layer of gesso primer, then painted on top of it with a hybrid of oil and tempera, the way he would have painted a wooden panel. The richness was extraordinary. The colors deeper, the detail finer than anything wet plaster could achieve. The painting also started falling apart almost immediately. The pigment layer began detaching from the gesso within years, and by the time Giorgio Vasari saw the work in 1556, he described it as essentially ruined. For 4 centuries, art historians dismissed the technique as one of Leonardo's rare miscalculations. But here is the strange thing nobody talks about. His unusual method accidentally produced something a true fresco never could have. Distinct physical layers stacked one on top of the other. Markings made into the gesso primer would be completely invisible from above, hidden not just from casual viewers, but from every restoration tool that existed in his lifetime. The painting then survived a sequence of disasters that should have destroyed it many times over. In 1652, a doorway was cut into the bottom of the wall, taking out the feet of Christ. In 1726, a restorer named Michelangelo Bellotti scrubbed the surface with caustic soda and overpainted it in oil. 40 years later, another restorer scraped Bellotti's work off with iron tools. In 1796, French troops under Napoleon used the refectory as a cavalry stable, and soldiers reportedly threw stones at the apostles' faces. Then, on the night of August 15, 1943, Allied bombs flattened the entire complex. 2 refectory walls collapsed. The roof came down. The north wall holding the painting was the only thing left standing, protected by sandbags and scaffolding that Italian art officials had reinforced 3 years earlier. The painting sat exposed to the weather for nearly 2 years afterwards. For 5 centuries, the wall absorbed everything the world threw at it, and never gave up its secrets. Then a woman named Pinin Brambilla Barcellone walked into the refectory in 1978 and finally started peeling the layers apart. 21 years inside the wall. Pinin Brambilla Barcellone was already considered one of the finest restorers in Italy when she took on the Last Supper. She had spent decades on Giotto's frescoes in Padua and other Renaissance masterpieces. What was supposed to be a multi-year project for her became 21 years of her professional life. She started in 1978, and the painting did not return to public display until May 28, 1999. The team bricked up the windows and turned the refectory into a sealed, climate-controlled chamber. They used infrared reflectoscopy to peer beneath the surface. They took microscopic core samples to analyze every pigment layer. They compared what they found against Leonardo's original cartoons preserved at Windsor Castle, and what Pietro Marani, the senior scholar who worked alongside her, eventually concluded was that less than half of the painted surface was actually by Leonardo's hand. The fresco the world had been admiring for centuries was largely an 18th century recreation by previous restorers. Pinin spent 2 decades patiently removing their work to reveal whatever fragments of Leonardo had survived underneath. Then, in 2007, 8 years after Pinin finished, a different kind of revelation happened. An Italian company called Alta Definizione partnered with the Italian Ministry of Cultural Assets to capture the entire painting at 16 billion pixels of resolution, The shoot took place on May 7th of that year. 1,677 individual photographs were stitched together using 16 gigabytes of working memory and 2 terabytes of disk space. Lighting was specially developed in collaboration with Rome's Central Restoration Institute to use no ultraviolet wavelengths and minimal heat. At 1 millimeter per pixel resolution, viewers could see things nobody had ever noticed in 500 years. The bell tower of a church visible through the painted windows, wrinkles in the tablecloth that turned out to be embroidered with Assisi-style needlework, the reflection of an orange wedge inside the pewter plate sitting in front of the Apostle Matthew. The hyperspectral data went into the archives, the high-resolution scans went online, and for almost 2 decades they sat there waiting for someone to figure out what to do with them. The technology to read what might be underneath did not yet exist. Then artificial intelligence finally caught up. The machines that are reading old masters right now. If you think the idea of AI pulling hidden messages out of a painting sounds like science fiction, you should know that this is already happening on a massive scale, just not yet on the Last Supper. The Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam has been running something called Operation Night Watch since 2019. They placed Rembrandt's most famous painting inside a glass chamber on a custom easel in the middle of the museum and have been scanning it continuously ever since. 12,500 high-resolution photographs, 56 macro X-ray fluorescence scans, each one running for 24 hours straight. The team includes a senior scientist named Robert Erdman, who also teaches at the University of Amsterdam, and in 2021, they used neural networks to digitally reconstruct strips of canvas that had been physically cut off the painting back in 1715. They trained the AI on a 17th century copy by another artist and rebuilt what was missing pixel by pixel. Then they discovered a hidden charcoal sketch by Rembrandt himself that revealed his original composition. A different team called Oxia Palace, founded by 2 researchers at University College London named Anthony Bourrached and George Can, has been recreating paintings hidden underneath Picasso's Blue Period works. They use X-ray and infrared scans, run the data through a neural network trained on Picasso's authentic style, and then physically print 3-dimensional reconstructions of the paintings he buried beneath later canvases. They have already brought back a lonesome crouching nude that was hiding under the blind man's meal at the Met in New York. They have surfaced a woman's face hidden inside the old guitarist at the Art Institute of Chicago. They have even started training a separate model on 225 Leonardo and workshop paintings. A French scientist named Pascal Cotte has spent over a decade running a technique he calls layer amplification on the Mona Lisa at the Louvre. He projects high-intensity light at the panel and measures the reflections coming back, and in 2015, he announced that he had found 3 completely different portraits buried beneath the painting we all know. The earliest version did not even smile. Martin Kemp at Oxford, the most respected living Leonardo scholar, has publicly disagreed with parts of Cotte's interpretation. But nobody disputes that there are hidden layers down there. The argument is only about what they actually mean. So when you hear that an AI might be reading mirror script underneath the Last Supper, the underlying technology is genuinely real and operating right now in major museums across the world. What nobody has officially confirmed yet is whether anyone has finished training a model on Leonardo's handwriting and pointing it at that specific wall. But somebody actually did find something hidden inside the Last Supper itself almost 20 years ago, and almost nobody noticed. The music buried in the bread. In 2007, an Italian musician and computer technician named Giovanni Maria Palla published a small book that should have made global headlines and somehow barely registered. Palla had been studying high-resolution images of the Last Supper for years, and he noticed something nobody else had ever pointed out. If you draw a 5-line musical staff across the painting at the right vertical position, the loaves of bread on the table and the hands of the apostles all fall onto specific note positions on that staff. He read the notes from right to left, the same direction Leonardo wrote in his notebooks. 12 apostles arranged in groups of 3 suggested 3/4 time. What Paula produced from this was a 40-second hymn that sounds like a slow requiem played on a pipe organ. He published it under the title La Musica Celata, which means the hidden music. Alessandro Vezzosi, who runs the Museo Ideale Leonardo da Vinci in Vinci itself, told reporters that there is always a risk of seeing things that are not really there, but he confirmed that the spaces in the painting are clearly divided according to harmonic proportions. Where you have harmonic proportion, you can find music. If a 40-second melody could be hiding inside the bread on a table, what else might be hiding in the rest of the wall? And why would Leonardo have wanted to hide anything in the first place? Why a genius would bury words where nobody could find them? The Catholic Church of Leonardo's era did not tolerate intellectual rebellion. Roughly 100 years after Leonardo finished the Last Supper, a Dominican friar named Giordano Bruno was burned alive in the Campo dei Fiori in Rome on February 17, 1600. His crime was proposing that the universe contained other inhabited worlds, that the soul could exist in animals, and that the Trinity was not what the Church said it was. He spent 8 years in prison being interrogated by Cardinal Robert Bellarmine before the sentence was carried out. According to one eyewitness account from a German visitor, when the inquisitors read the verdict to him, Bruno responded that perhaps they pronounced the sentence with greater fear than he received it. They led him naked through the streets with his mouth gagged with a leather bridle to stop him preaching from the stake, and his ashes were thrown into the Tiber River. 33 years later, in 1633, Galileo Galilei was placed under house arrest for the rest of his natural life for daring to suggest that the Earth moved around the Sun. The Catholic Church did not formally rehabilitate him until 1992, and the Index of Forbidden Books that banned scientific and philosophical works remained active until June 14, 1966. Leonardo was painting the Last Supper inside that exact world. The 1559 Index would not appear for another 60 years after he finished the work, but the intellectual climate that produced it was already alive in his time. He had already learned at age 23 what could happen to anyone whose private thinking became public. So if Leonardo did want to leave a message that questioned faith or championed reason, he had every incentive to bury it where only a future generation could find it. And here is where the truth about Leonardo becomes more powerful than any fictional discovery. He did leave that message. He just did not have to hide it inside the wall. The real message. Leonardo left for the future. Leonardo's notebooks contain dozens of passages that genuinely prefigure the philosophical revolution that would arrive in Europe 250 years after his death. He wrote that all sciences are vain and full of errors that are not born of experience, the mother of all knowledge. He wrote that nature commences with reason and ends in experience, but that thinking minds must do the opposite, beginning with experience and reasoning their way back to underlying causes. He wrote that wherever true science is known, controversy is silenced for all time. His personal motto, written and rewritten across his manuscripts in his backwards handwriting, was ostinato rigore, obstinate rigor. He wrote that nothing can be loved or hated unless it is first known. These are not mystical phrases pulled out of a wall by a neural network. They are real sentences in Leonardo's actual handwriting, sitting inside notebooks scattered across 24 institutions from Milan to London, to the private collection of Bill Gates, who paid $30,802,500 at a Christie's auction in November of 1994 for one of them. Every argument that Voltaire would make in 1764 against superstition, every demand for autonomous human reason that Kant would write in 1784 when he coined the phrase, "dare to know," every belief that experience trumps inherited authority that fueled the entire Enlightenment, Leonardo had already laid down in private decades before any of those men were born. The Last Supper itself was never just a devotional painting. Pinin Brambilla Barcelon dedicated more than 2 decades of her life to peeling away the centuries of overpainting because she understood that. Paula saw it when he found the music. The teams running hyperspectral scans across Europe are continuing the same project today. Whether or not an AI eventually pulls coherent phrases out of the wall, the painting was always carrying a quieter message about who Leonardo really was. So tell me in the comments what you think Leonardo was really trying to communicate to us across all these centuries, and which other masterpieces you think are still hiding their truths in plain sight.